The third time the gate flashed access denied, I didn't panic. I exhaled. Quietly, like someone watching the final piece fall into place. From the other side of the camera, Patricia's voice came sharp and smug. "This is private property now. Please leave." The residents behind her watched, expecting me to argue, but I didn't. I simply reached for the small wooden box I'd kept hidden for 6 months. Because today wasn't about arguing, it was about unveiling the trap I'd built under their noses. They'd locked me out, thinking I'd lost. What they didn't know? That gate wasn't just theirs. It was mine too. By the way, if you've ever faced a power-hungry HOA or a smug neighbor with a clipboard, drop your city in the comments. I'd love to see how far this kind of story reaches. It was a crisp autumn morning when everything began to shift. I was repairing the fence on the eastern side of my ranch, the side that faced the Oak Ridge community, a collection of cookie-cutter homes with perfectly manicured lawns that had sprung up 5 years ago adjacent to my property. The contrast between their uniform perfection and my sprawling, somewhat wild 5 acres couldn't have been more stark. The weathered wood of my fence needed reinforcement before winter, and I was enjoying the rhythmic work of hammering when my phone chimed with an email notification. The subject line read, "Urgent, updated regulations regarding shared road usage and access control." My stomach tightened as I opened it, still standing beside my half-finished fence repair. 5 years ago, after leaving my position at Wesley Construction, I'd purchased this ranch as a fresh start. Elizabeth and I had fallen in love with the space, the freedom, and the sunset views from the back porch. We'd planned to grow old here together, watching the seasons change from our rocking chairs. But 2 years ago, cancer took her far too quickly, leaving me alone with our dreams and this land that now felt simultaneously too empty and the only place I could breathe. The Oak Ridge development had been completed shortly after we moved in, and though initially I'd tried to be neighborly, the HOA, specifically its president, Patricia Henderson, had made it increasingly clear that my ranch was considered an eyesore, disrupting their carefully cultivated community aesthetic. Reading through the email, my concern deepened. The Homeowners Association was claiming authority over the private access road that led to my ranch, the only way in or out of my property. According to the new clarified regulations, they were implementing community-wide access controls for enhanced security and property value preservation. The email mentioned plans for an electronic gate system that would regulate traffic flow according to community standards. What it didn't mention was how this would affect my daily access to my own home, or the fact that the road in question was actually on my property, according to my deed. I called Dave Miller, my closest neighbor and probably the only genuine friend I had in the community. Within 30 minutes, he was sitting on my porch, beer in hand, discussing the implications. "It's not just about the road, Ethan," Dave explained, taking a swig from his bottle. "There's talk about Veritech buying up land in the area for some kind of upscale commercial complex. Word is they've been courting the county commissioners for months." Dave, a former police officer who now ran an auto repair shop, had connections throughout the local government and always seemed to know what was happening before it hit the public channels. As we talked, I recalled the numerous small conflicts I'd had with Patricia over the years. Complaints about my chickens on the sanitary, my vegetable garden unsightly, tall plants, and the occasional parking of my truck in view of the community entrance. Decreases curb appeal. Each incident had been a minor annoyance, but pieced together, they formed a pattern of harassment that now seemed to have a more calculated purpose. "I think you should attend the HOA meeting next week," Dave suggested. "They're planning to officially announce the security upgrades. Might be worth hearing directly." I normally avoided community gatherings. The pitying looks and awkward conversations about Elizabeth still hurt too much, but this situation warranted making an exception. The following Thursday evening, I entered the Oak Ridge Community Center for the first time in over a year. The room felt noticeably quieter as I took a seat in the back row. Several residents glanced in my direction with expressions ranging from surprise to curiosity. Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman who had brought Elizabeth homemade soup during her final months, offered a gentle smile that momentarily warmed the cold atmosphere. Patricia, immaculately dressed as always in a tailored blazer that screamed authority, barely acknowledged my presence with a tight-lipped nod before beginning the meeting. Her perfectly manicured fingernails tapped impatiently on the podium as she waited for the murmurs about my appearance to subside. As expected, the main agenda item was the exciting Security Enhancement Initiative, featuring an electronic gate system with personalized access cards for all residents. As Patricia spoke, her voice carried the practiced enthusiasm of a saleswoman closing a deal, her eyes occasionally drifting toward me to gauge my reaction. When question time arrived, I raised my hand. I'm curious about the legal basis for installing gates on what appears to be a private access road, particularly one that affects non-HOA property owners, I said, keeping my voice level and professional, drawing on my engineering background. Patricia's smile didn't waver, though her eyes hardened. The community access road falls under HOA jurisdiction according to the original development plans, she replied smoothly. We've had our legal team review everything thoroughly. Now moving on to the landscaping committee report. The dismissal was clear and immediate, but not before I noticed a man in the back corner, someone I didn't recognize, exchange a significant glance with Patricia. As the meeting concluded, I lingered, observing rather than participating in the small talk. The unknown man approached Patricia, speaking in hushed tones. His expensive suit and commanding presence marked him as someone of importance. I caught the name badge on his lapel, Greg Johnson, Veritech Development. The pieces were beginning to align in a way that made me increasingly uneasy. On my way out, Robert Williams, one of the older HOA board members, deliberately brushed past me. You should be careful, he murmured, just loudly enough for me to hear. They're targeting you. Before I could ask what he meant, he had moved on, leaving me with more questions than answers. That night, I pulled out all my property documents, deeds, surveys, original sale agreements, spreading them across my dining table. The weathered oak surface that Elizabeth and I had found at a country auction now held what might be the key to saving our dream. I had reviewed these papers when purchasing the property, of course, but now I examined them with new scrutiny. Especially the detailed boundary maps. The faded blue lines and official stamps took on new significance as I traced the property boundaries with my finger, a cup of cold coffee forgotten at my elbow. After 3 hours of careful reading, squinting under the warm glow of the kitchen pendant light Elizabeth had insisted would make the space feel like home, I'd discovered something I had overlooked. The access road wasn't merely my property. It was part of an original historical easement with specific legal provisions dating back to when the county roads were first established. The language was archaic but unmistakable, preserved in legal terminology that had survived decades of property transfers. I couldn't believe I had missed this detail for 5 years. The road to my ranch wasn't just private property. It was potentially the key to a much bigger issue that Patricia had no idea existed. As the realization dawned, I found myself laughing for the first time in weeks, the sound echoing in the empty farmhouse. The following morning, I called Sarah Thompson, a local attorney specializing in real estate law whom I'd met through a mutual friend. Her small office above the town's only coffee shop was cluttered but organized, much like her approach to legal matters. "This is fascinating, Ethan," she said, adjusting her glasses as she reviewed my documents. "The easement rights here are unusually specific. According to this, the access road isn't just privately owned by you. It's technically a historic right-of-way with perpetual access provisions." She pointed to a clause in the original deed that I had highlighted. "This means they can't legally restrict your access without your explicit permission, regardless of any HOA bylaws they create after the fact." I leaned forward, tapping the old boundary map I'd brought. "There's more. Look at this section here. The road was originally part of the county's historic route system. When the land was subdivided for the Oak Ridge development, there was a special provision that the original ranch owner, now me, would maintain control of the access point." Sarah's eyes widened as she followed my reasoning. "This could be significant. We should research the complete history of the property at the county records office. There might be additional documentation that strengthens your position." The county records office was a windowless basement room, filled with filing cabinets and the musty smell of old paper. I spent an entire day there, methodically working through property records dating back to when the area was first developed. What I discovered was revelatory. The current HOA properties had all been carved from the original farmland that included my ranch. The developer had sold off the residential parcels, but maintained specific covenants regarding the access road, covenants that had transferred to me when I purchased the property. Most significantly, I found an easement clause stating that the right-of-ways could not be altered without the explicit consent of the ranch owner. While digging through these records, I also came across recent permit applications from Veritech Development. plans for a luxury mixed-use complex that would require access through what was currently Oak Ridge, with a specific notation about resolving access issues with adjacent agricultural property. The blueprint clearly showed a widened road cutting right through where my ranch house currently stood. The timeline indicated they hoped to begin construction within 8 months, which explained the sudden urgency of the gate installation. They weren't just trying to inconvenience me. They were systematically creating conditions that would force me to sell. Dave proved invaluable during this investigation phase. Using his connections and natural talent for blending in, he began observing Patricia's movements and reported back that she was having regular meetings with Greg Johnson from Veritech at a restaurant 20 miles away, far enough to avoid local gossip. With Dave's help, I also set up a private conversation with Robert Williams, recording it with his permission. The board doesn't know everything, Robert confessed, his voice low despite us being alone in his garden. Patricia has been holding separate meetings with select members. They've been discussing what they call the old ranch problem for months. There's a lot of money involved, Ethan. Veritech has promised significant community improvements if the deal goes through. Armed with this information, I returned to Sarah's office to develop a strategy. She spread the documents across her desk, thinking aloud. What we have here is extraordinary, Ethan. According to these original documents, when the developers sold the parcels that became Oak Ridge, they retained control of the access road as a historic easement, control that transferred to you when you bought the ranch. But here's the key point. You don't just own the road to your ranch. Based on these boundary descriptions and easement rights, you actually control the entire access point to the Oak Ridge community itself. Her words hit me like a thunderbolt. I stared at her, processing the implications. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Sarah's expression was both serious and slightly amused. Ethan, they can't lock you out, but you could legally lock them out. Of course, I'm not suggesting you actually do that, she added quickly, but it gives us significant leverage. They've clearly been operating under the assumption that the HOA has authority over the access road, when legally, it's exactly the opposite. This revelation changed everything. What had begun as a defensive investigation to protect my property now revealed a powerful counter-strategy. If Patricia and Veritech wanted to play hardball, I now had the means to respond in kind. I didn't want to disrupt my neighbors' lives. Most of them were simply families caught in Patricia's power games, but I needed to protect my home and the future Elizabeth and I had planned here. What's our next move? I asked Sarah, feeling a strange calm settle over me. This wasn't just about an annoying HOA president anymore. It was about standing up to corporate bullying and manipulation. First, we need to formally establish your legal control of the access road through the proper channels. But quietly, Sarah advised. We'll file the necessary paperwork with the county to clarify the easement rights. Then, we wait and observe. Let them continue with their gate plan for now. It's better if they don't realize what we know until we're ready to act. As I left her office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. A sense of purpose and the satisfaction of knowing I wasn't powerless. Patricia might have the HOA in her pocket and a development company backing her, but I had the law and the truth on my side, and soon I would have a plan. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I meticulously crafted our legal strategy, weighing every risk and potential outcome. We decided on a phased approach. First, legally solidify my ownership of the access road through formal documentation. Second, gather evidence of the HOA's actions and intentions. And finally, prepare for a definitive confrontation when the time was right. This wasn't just about defending my property rights. It was about exposing a systematic attempt to force me out for corporate gain. I approached Robert again, this time more directly, asking him to keep me informed about the HOA's internal discussions. Though nervous, he agreed, troubled by the secretive nature of Patricia's leadership. Dave helped me install security cameras around my property and along the access road, positioned discreetly to avoid drawing attention. I began attending HOA meetings regularly, adopting a facade of cooperative interest in the community's security upgrades. I even volunteered to join the security committee, much to Patricia's poorly concealed suspicion. It's good to see you taking an interest in community matters, Ethan, she said after one meeting, her smile not reaching her eye. We've been concerned about your isolation since Elizabeth passed. The mention of my wife's name from her lips felt like a violation, but I maintained my composure, knowing that my apparent compliance was part of a larger strategy. Patricia's suspicion gradually morphed into smug satisfaction as she interpreted my involvement as acceptance or even defeat. Behind the scenes, however, I hired a professional land surveyor to definitively mark the property boundaries according to the original deeds. The survey confirmed what we had discovered. The access road was entirely on my property, and I held legal rights to the critical connection point that served as the only entrance to Oak Ridge. Sarah worked diligently to file the appropriate documentation with the county, officially clarifying the easement rights in public records without drawing attention to our actions. Using a directional microphone borrowed from Dave's days in law enforcement, I managed to record a conversation between Patricia and Greg in the Oak Ridge Community Garden, where they discussed removing obstacles and ensuring clean access for the future development. Greg mentioned a timeline that aligned perfectly with Veritech's permit applications. Once the gate system is operational, we can begin implementing Phase 2. Patricia had said, her voice clear on the recording. The security protocols will make it increasingly difficult for him to maintain that eyesore of a ranch. Everyone has a breaking point. Their callous planning reinforced my determination to see this through. As expected, the HOA sent formal notification about the electronic gate installation, scheduled to begin in 30 days. The accompanying updated access regulations revealed their strategy. Each household would receive only 2 access cards, with additional cards available for a processing fee of $100 each. Most significantly, agricultural vehicles, like my tractor, would require special permits and could only access the road during limited hours. The restrictions were clearly designed to make my daily life increasingly difficult, creating pressure to sell. These new rules would take effect once the gate was operational, estimated at 6 to 8 weeks from the installation's start date. Rather than object to the gate itself, I took a different approach. At the next HOA meeting, I publicly expressed support for enhanced community security and even offered to contribute to the security fund. The stunned silence that followed my announcement was worth every penny the $500 check I wrote on the spot. Patricia's momentary confusion quickly transformed into triumphant satisfaction as she accepted my contribution, clearly believing she had won. "Your community spirit is appreciated, Ethan," she announced to the room, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "This kind of cooperation makes Oak Ridge the special place that it is." As I drove home that evening, I couldn't help smiling at the irony. Patricia thought she was tightening a noose around my property, never suspecting that she was actually walking into a trap of my own design. Sarah had completed all the necessary legal filings, securing my rights to the access road and official county records. The survey markers were in place, though deliberately inconspicuous. The security cameras were operational, documenting all activities around the property boundaries. Everything was proceeding according to plan. When Patricia had taken my check, her smug smile had nearly made me laugh out loud. In 3 weeks, that gate would be installed, and that would be the moment my trap would spring shut. That night, I sat on my back porch, watching the sunset that Elizabeth and I had loved so much. "I think you'd approve of this plan," I said softly to the empty chair beside me. "You always said that bullies need to be stood up to, not just for yourself, but for everyone they might hurt." The familiar ache of her absence was still there, but alongside it was a new sense of purpose. This land had been our dream, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away, especially not someone who saw people's homes as mere obstacles to profit. The gate installation began 2 weeks later with a team of contractors arriving in logo-emblazoned vans. I observed the process from a distance, taking notes on the technical specifications and placement. They were installing a substantial system, a decorative iron gate with electronic controls, keycard readers, and an intercom system connected to a guardhouse that would be staffed during peak hours. Patricia made several appearances during the installation, proudly overseeing what she clearly considered her crowning achievement. At the monthly HOA meeting, she presented detailed slides of the security system, emphasizing how it would enhance community value and censure appropriate access controls. The subtext was clear to anyone paying attention. Undesirable elements, specifically my ranch, would be effectively contained. What Patricia didn't realize was that in her haste to implement the gate system, she had neglected several critical legal requirements. There was no proper building permit for the gate structure itself, no public notice had been filed for modifying a historic access road, and the electrical work had been completed without the necessary county inspections. Sarah helped me prepare a comprehensive legal dossier documenting each violation, including a petition for an injunction to cease operation of the gate, pending proper approvals. "We won't file this yet," she advised. "Let's wait until the system is operational. That way any shutdown will have maximum impact." I arranged a discreet meeting with the county building inspector, providing information about the unpermitted construction. He confirmed that the work should have required several permits and expressed concern about electrical installations that hadn't been inspected. "I can't act officially without a formal complaint," he explained, "but once one is filed, I would have to issue a stop work order until everything is brought up to code." This was another piece of leverage we could use when the time came. Robert proved invaluable, providing me with minutes from a private HOA executive session where Patricia had explicitly acknowledged the permit issues, but instructed the board to proceed anyway, stating that it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission, and by then the system will be operational. This documented knowledge of deliberate code violations would be particularly damaging if made public. Meanwhile, I established a shell company through Sarah's law firm and arranged to quietly purchase the debt related to the gate installation from the construction company. They were happy to sell the receivable at a slight discount for immediate payment, never realizing the strategic value of what they were transferring. Dave helped me prepare for Action Day, as we had begun calling it. We installed additional cameras, prepared replacement signage that would be needed, and secured backup locks in case the electronic system was overridden. We documented every relevant detail, gate access codes, security patrol schedules, and the technical specifications of the locking mechanism. One particularly telling discovery came when Greg from Veritech made another appearance, this time with a surveying team measuring and marking areas near my property line. Though they tried to be discreet, my cameras captured their activities clearly, including them placing small marker stakes along what appeared to be a planned road expansion. A week before the gate was scheduled to become operational, I received an official HOA notification about the distribution of access cards, scheduled for Sunday afternoon at the community center. The letter included a detailed explanation of the access protocols, including the 2-card per household limit and special provisions for service vehicles. What caught my attention was a handwritten note at the bottom, in Patricia's distinctive script. Residents with non-conforming properties must adhere to additional security measures. See attached. The attachment was a separate sheet outlining restrictions specifically applicable to agricultural properties adjoining the community, including limited access hours and special permission requirements for equipment. The evening before the access card distribution, my phone chimed with a text message from Patricia. "I think you should prepare alternative arrangements for accessing your ranch. We're only issuing one access card for each non-standard residence. New policy." The message was so transparently punitive that it was almost comical. Rather than responding with the anger she was likely hoping to provoke, I sent back a simple, neutral reply. "I'll be at the distribution event. Thanks for the notification." What Patricia couldn't know was that her text had just provided another piece of documentary evidence of discriminatory treatment, another link in the chain of legal leverage we were assembling. That night, I reviewed everything with Sarah one final time. All the legal documentation was in order. The evidence was secured in multiple locations, and the county officials were on standby, awaiting my formal complaint. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Sarah asked. "Once we start, there's no turning back. Patricia and the HOA will likely retaliate in whatever ways they can." I looked at the photograph of Elizabeth on my desk, her smile as bright as the day we had moved into this ranch with such hope for our future. "I'm sure," I replied. "Some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight gets messy." Sunday afternoon arrived with perfect weather for Patricia's grand unveiling of the gate access system. I arrived at the community center early, deliberately dressed more formally than usual, in slacks and a button-down shirt. The distribution table was set up in the main hall, with Patricia herself presiding over the process like a queen granting audiences. As each homeowner approached, she personally handed over their access cards with a rehearsed speech about community security and property value protection. I waited patiently in line, observing the proceedings, and the evident pride Patricia took in what she clearly viewed as a personal triumph. When my turn came, Patricia's smile faltered momentarily before she recovered her composure. "Ethan," she announced, loud enough for nearby residents to hear, "as we discussed, properties classified as non-residential agricultural have special access provisions." She slid a single access card across the table, noticeably different from the two cards every other resident had received. "This card will work during standard access hours only, and agricultural vehicles require advance notice through the online portal. We've implemented these measures to ensure road maintenance costs are fairly distributed." The manufactured justification was a nice touch, I had to admit. I accepted the card with a polite nod, maintaining the cooperative facade I'd established over the previous weeks. "I understand. Community security is important to all of us." My calm acceptance clearly disappointed her. She had been anticipating an argument that would portray me as unreasonable in front of other residents. Testing the card at the newly operational gate confirmed what I had suspected. Unlike the standard access cards, mine was programmed with restricted hours, allowing entry only between 6 in the morning and 10 at night. Any emergency or early farming needs would leave me effectively stranded, precisely as Patricia had intended. The discrimination became even more blatant that afternoon when I deliberately drove my tractor toward the gate. As expected, the card reader flashed red despite being within the permitted hours. Patricia appeared almost immediately. She had clearly been waiting for this moment. "I'm afraid agricultural equipment requires special authorization," she explained with poorly concealed satisfaction. "The weight and dirt from farm vehicles cause excessive wear on our community roads. The authorization process takes 3 business days and requires approval from the Road Maintenance Committee." When I began recording our conversation on my phone, her demeanor shifted instantly. "Recording is not permitted on community property," she snapped, stepping toward me aggressively. "That's a violation of HOA bylaws." Over the next week, the restrictions escalated. My regular access card began experiencing technical difficulties, requiring me to use the intercom system and explain my presence to security personnel each time I wanted to enter or leave my own property. Deliveries to my ranch were delayed or turned away without proper authorization. On one occasion, I returned from grocery shopping to find the gate attendant clearly acting on instructions, inspecting the contents of my truck before reluctantly allowing me to pass. Each incident was carefully documented through my security cameras and detailed logs that Sarah had advised me to maintain. Driving home after a particularly frustrating encounter at the gate, I spotted Greg from Veritech surveying land adjacent to my property, accompanied by what appeared to be contractors. They quickly dispersed when they noticed my approach, but not before I captured photos of them examining site plans that suspiciously included my ranch boundaries. That evening, Robert called with troubling news. "Patricia convinced the board that your ranch poses an environmental hazard due to agricultural runoff. They're preparing to issue formal complaints to the county environmental office." The fabricated environmental concerns were clearly another angle of attack designed to increase regulatory pressure on my property. With Dave's technical assistance, we managed to access Veritech's preliminary site plans through publicly available permit applications. The documents confirmed our suspicions. The proposed development included a large commercial complex positioned exactly where my ranch house stood, with an expanded access road cutting through my property. The timeline indicated groundbreaking within 8 months. Explaining the accelerated pressure to force me out, Veritech needed my land, and Patricia was their willing accomplice, likely in exchange for considerable personal benefit. 3 weeks after the gate became operational, I received a certified letter from the HOA. Inside was a formal offer to purchase my ranch at what they termed a fair market value, approximately 30% below actual market rate. The letter cited community development needs and infrastructure compatibility requirements as justifications for the offer, concluding with a thinly veiled threat. Failure to work cooperatively with community development plans may result in increased access restrictions and potential legal actions regarding code compliance issues. The letter was signed by Patricia as HOA president and included Greg Johnson's business card with, "For questions about property transition," handwritten on the back. That night, I called Sarah and Dave to my ranch. Over coffee at my kitchen table, we reviewed all the evidence we had collected: the discriminatory access restrictions, the documented code violations, the recorded conversations, and now the coercive purchase offer. "They've given us everything we need," Sarah said, reviewing the certified letter. This explicitly connects the access restrictions to their attempt to force a sale. It's textbook coercion and likely violates several housing laws. Dave nodded in agreement. They're so confident in their power that they didn't even try to hide what they're doing. Classic mistake. After 3 weeks of escalating harassment and restriction, I had compiled overwhelming evidence of discriminatory treatment and improper use of HOA authority. The electronic gate that Patricia had envisioned as a tool to control and ultimately remove me had instead become the centerpiece of my counter-strategy. As my visitors left that evening, I stood at my property line, looking at the illuminated gate in the distance. Time for phase 2, I murmured to myself. It was time to show Patricia who really controlled the access to this community. The next morning, I requested an emergency meeting with the HOA board, citing urgent access issues affecting resident safety. Patricia agreed with evident reluctance, likely hoping to contain any complaints within a private board meeting rather than having them aired at a full community gathering. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening in the small conference room of the community center, a venue choice clearly intended to limit attendance. I arrived precisely on time, accompanied by Sarah, whose presence as legal counsel visibly unsettled Patricia and the other board members. "We understand you're experiencing some adjustment difficulties with the new security system," Patricia began condescendingly once everyone was seated. "While we sympathize with your situation, the community's security needs must take priority over individual preferences. The access provisions for non-standard properties were thoroughly reviewed by our committee." Linda Pearson, Patricia's loyal secretary, nodded emphatically beside her. "Perhaps if your property conformed more to community standards, these issues wouldn't arise," she added with faux helpfulness. I maintained a calm professional demeanor as I described the various access issues I had documented over the previous weeks. Patricia and Linda exchanged knowing glances, clearly dismissing my concerns as the complaints of someone who simply refused to adapt to community rules. "The solution seems rather straightforward," Patricia finally interrupted. "You can either comply with the access protocols established for properties like yours, or you might consider whether maintaining an agricultural property in this developing area still makes sense. The HOA's offer to purchase remains open, and I believe it's quite generous given the circumstances." The moment had arrived. I nodded to Sarah, who opened her briefcase and removed a bound document set. "Before we discuss that offer," I said, my voice steady, "I think we should clarify some legal matters regarding the access road and gate." I slid the first document across the table, the original property deed with the easement provisions highlighted. "According to county records, the access road that you've restricted is actually located on my property, with specific easement rights that cannot be modified without the property owner's consent. That would be me." The sudden shift in atmosphere was palpable. Patricia's dismissive expression faltered as she scanned the document. "This is some obscure historical paperwork," she objected. "The development plans clearly established the road as community property under HOA jurisdiction." I shook my head and presented the second document, the recent land survey with official county certification. This updated survey, completed last month and registered with the county assessor, confirms the original boundary markers. The access road falls entirely within my property line, with a legal easement allowing community use, subject to the property owner's approval of any modifications. Robert chose this moment to speak up, his voice carrying the weight of his 20 years as a community resident. "He's right, Patricia. I reviewed the original development plans when I first joined the board. The road was always designated as an easement through the ranch property. We never actually owned it." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Patricia's face flushed with anger as she realized the extent of her miscalculation. "This is ridiculous. Our legal team reviewed everything before we installed the gate system. This is clearly some kind of manipulation of old documents." Sarah calmly presented the next item, a formal legal complaint naming both the HOA and Patricia personally, alleging discriminatory housing practices, improper restriction of property access, and coercive business practices. "This complaint has not been filed yet," Sarah explained, "but it includes substantial documentary evidence of targeted harassment, including recordings, witness statements, and the HOA's own minutes indicating a coordinated effort to force Mr. Westbrook to sell his property." She then produced printed copies of the messages between Patricia and Greg, clearly showing their collusion. The door opened unexpectedly, and Greg Johnson himself walked in, apparently summoned by a text from Patricia. His confident demeanor suggested he expected to help manage whatever minor issue had arisen. He froze momentarily upon seeing the documents spread across the table and Sarah's professional presence. "Perhaps we can discuss this privately and come to some reasonable arrangement," he suggested smoothly, recovering his composure. "Development always requires compromises, but I'm sure we can find terms that benefit everyone." I stood up, gathering my documents. I'm not interested in arrangements or compromises that involve surrendering my property. Effective 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, I will be exercising my legal rights as the owner of the access road. I placed one final document on the table, a formal cease and desist letter regarding the electronic gate operation. The gate was installed without proper permits, on my property, without my consent, in violation of multiple county ordinances. I've already filed complaints with the relevant authorities who will be conducting inspections tomorrow morning. Patricia's face had drained of color, her usual composure completely shattered. "You can't do this. The community requires security. You'll be violating the rights of every resident." I met her gaze steadily. "I have no intention of restricting legitimate resident access. Unlike you, I don't use access control as a weapon, but the current discriminatory system will be shut down, and any future access solutions will require my approval as the legal property owner." I turned to leave, then paused at the door. "I suggest you prepare an explanation for the community about why their expensive new gate system is being deactivated. You might want to start with the truth, though I understand that would be a significant departure from your usual approach." The following morning, at precisely 8 o'clock, I arrived at the gate, accompanied by Sarah, the county building inspector, and a sheriff's deputy to enforce the stop work order. The gate attendant watched in confusion as official notices were posted and the power to the electronic system was disconnected. Within an hour, my team had installed new signage at the entrance: "Private road with public easement, maintained by Westbrook Ranch." As predicted, Patricia arrived shortly thereafter, her luxury SUV screeching to a halt when she saw the deactivated gate standing open and the new signage in place. The look of shocked disbelief on her face was a moment I would treasure for years to come. But this was just the beginning. As the community residents returned home that afternoon, they would discover an even more shocking reality. Not just the gate, but the entire community entrance was now under my legal control. The trap I had carefully constructed over months had finally closed, and Patricia was caught squarely in the middle of it. By Sunday evening, the Oak Ridge community was in turmoil. Patricia had hastily called an emergency community meeting, attempting to control the narrative by characterizing my actions as hostile and anti-community. Her strategy backfired spectacularly when I arrived at the meeting, held in the community park, as the center was suddenly unavailable, with a comprehensive presentation of my own. I believe everyone deserves to know exactly what's been happening behind the scenes at Oak Ridge. I began addressing the crowd of concerned residents. This isn't about a gate or road access. It's about a systematic attempt to force me out of my home, to make way for commercial development that would forever change this community. Using a portable projector set up on my truck, I presented the evidence chronologically. The Veritech development plans that would transform the area from residential to commercial, the documented meetings between Patricia and corporate representatives, the board minutes showing deliberate targeting of my property, and finally, the discriminatory access restrictions implemented through the gate system. As understanding dawned across the faces in the crowd, the atmosphere shifted palpably. "The gate wasn't installed for your security," I explained. "It was the first step in a process designed to make my life so difficult that I would have no choice but to sell my ranch, allowing Veritech to build a commercial complex that would increase traffic, noise, and fundamentally alter the character of your neighborhood." Patricia attempted to interrupt multiple times, her usual composure completely abandoned. "This is slander. He's manipulating you with out-of-context information." Greg Johnson tried to support her claims, suggesting that the development would enhance property values and bring amenities to the community. Their protestations fell flat as I played audio recordings of their private conversations discussing how to eliminate the ranch problem and manage community expectations once the development plans became public. The most damning evidence came when Linda Pearson, visibly distressed by the revelations, stood up and confirmed that she had helped Patricia alter meeting minutes and selective communication to the community. Robert rose next, his dignity and long-standing community presence lending weight to his words. I've lived in Oak Ridge since the first homes were built. What began as a friendly, cooperative community has become increasingly controlled and divided under the current leadership. The vision that brought many of us here has been corrupted by personal ambition and outside interests. His public support tipped the scales decisively as other residents began sharing their own stories of intimidation and selective enforcement under Patricia's leadership. As the community's anger focused on Patricia and the board, I presented my proposed solution. I have no desire to restrict your access or disrupt your daily lives. Although I legally own the access road, I'm willing to transfer operational control to a community trust with 3 conditions: elimination of all discriminatory access policies, establishment of transparent governance for all HOA decisions, and permanent protection of my ranch from any future development attempts. The proposal was met with immediate support from most residents, who had just learned how close they had come to having their residential community transformed into the parking lot for a commercial development. Patricia's final humiliation came when a formal vote of no confidence removed her as HOA president on the spot, with Robert appointed as interim leader until proper elections could be held. Red-faced and trembling with rage, Patricia was forced to publicly acknowledge her arrangement with Veritech and apologize for the unauthorized use of HOA funds for the improperly permitted gate. Greg Johnson departed in furious silence, knowing the development plan was effectively dead. Within days, Veritech withdrew their permit applications, and rumors circulated that internal investigations had begun regarding their business practices in the region. In the weeks that followed, a remarkable transformation took place in Oak Ridge. Under Robert's interim leadership, the HOA was restructured, with transparent governance policies and proper community involvement. The electronic gate was removed entirely, replaced with a simple, attractive entrance that remained open to all legitimate traffic. Patricia listed her house for sale and moved away within a month, her reputation in the community irreparably damaged. Her home was purchased by a young family who quickly became valued community members. As for my ranch, I decided to make positive use of the experience by opening portions of the property for community events. The large barn that had stood empty since Elizabeth's passing became the venue for monthly gatherings that helped rebuild the neighborhood connections that had been systematically undermined during Patricia's tenure. The vegetable garden that had once been cited as an eyesore became a community garden project, with neighbors working together and sharing the harvest. The chickens that had been deemed unsanitary now provided fresh eggs for community breakfasts, held on my back porch. 6 months after the confrontation, Veritech faced legal troubles of their own when investigations revealed improper business practices in multiple communities. Greg Johnson was quietly dismissed from the company, his aggressive development strategies having brought unwanted regulatory scrutiny. The county implemented new protections for historic properties and easements, using my case as an example of the importance of preserving property rights against corporate encroachment. The final resolution came when the newly elected HOA board and I signed a formal agreement establishing a community trust to manage the access road, with legal provisions ensuring both resident access and protection of my property rights. The document, framed and hung in the community center, served as a reminder of what can happen when communities stand together against manipulation and greed. What Patricia had intended as a tool of exclusion and control had ultimately become the catalyst for creating a stronger, more inclusive community. Each morning now, as I drive through the entrance that once held a gate designed to lock me out, I no longer see it as a personal victory. Instead, it stands as proof that when a community truly unites, no power-hungry individual can prevail. Once a month, when we host the community barbecue at the ranch with all the neighbors participating, I know that Elizabeth would be proud of the home we built together and the community that I'm now honored to be part of. Sometimes, the traps others set for us become the very means of our liberation, and what begins as a battle for personal justice can transform into something that benefits everyone. The gate that was meant to lock me out had instead opened the door to a stronger community than ever before.
You watched it. You felt it. Now share it with someone who loves drama even more than you. That's the QA Stories way.